You will never fully reach your potential as a runner until you understand how your body works during different types of sessions. Let's call them training zones. And that's just the truth. But luckily for you, I'm here to break it down so that you can absolutely maximize every session every time. From zone 1 and 2 up to zone 5 and including the dreaded zone 3. And I'm going to tell you how to calculate those zones as well. Knowledge is power, people. So if you learn something here, chuck us a subscribe and we'll help you some more. So where to start? Usually the start is a good place to start, and in this case we're going to start at what training zones actually are before we delve into what each different training zone does. And that's the bit that I think that most people get wrong most often, and it's not like it's wasted miles. You can train in any zone and get quite a lot of benefits, but it's not squeezing the juice out of the sessions, it's not maximizing the benefit. So there's a number of different models when it comes to training zones, but I want to keep it as simple as possible, like I need to for my brain. I think about 4 main zones that do 4 different things for your body, all as important as each other. And luckily I'm marathon training, so I regularly do quite a lot of different zone work within this process. So I'm going to take you through my week. Zone 1 and 2, as I say, group them together. They're the aerobic zones, and aerobic just means with oxygen. Then zone 3 is your lactate turn point 1. It's when you start to accumulate lactate in the blood. Zone 4 is just under your anaerobic threshold when you move from being able to use oxygen to not. And it's also your lactate turn point 2 when you build up so much lactate you're going to have to slow down pretty soon. And then zone 5 is the disgusting one, VO2 max, pretty much without oxygen. It is a hard zone to be in. But they're your 5 zones. Zones 1 and 2 are your aerobic base zones. To keep it as simple as possible, they're the zones where your runs feel easy, you're relaxed, and you feel like you're not going to explode. When you run at these paces and heart rates, your body is solely focused on breathing oxygen in and getting it to your muscles as part of the process of creating energy for you to do the exercise. And it's not worried about anything else. So the more you train here, the better your body gets at taking in oxygen and getting it to the muscles. Think bigger, stronger heart, lungs, more red blood cells. In fact, a whole host of things improve the more you do it. It is literally the platform your body uses for all other energy systems to work. The base of the pyramid, the foundations of the house. And the bigger the base, the more you can stack on top of it. But to really give the body the best chance of building the base, you need to make sure you stay in zones 1 and 2. You don't muddy the water by training too hard and confusing the body. And I usually see 2 main mistakes that confuse zone 2 with zone 3, particularly with newer runners.
Well, now you know what my zone 2 does for me, or for all of us. You can join me on my zone 2 aerobic base run while I'm out here, being able to hold a conversation, feeling guilty, maybe I should be running a bit harder, but actually not, and all of the good stuff that makes me know I'm in zone 2 right now. And there are 2 problems with zone 3 training when you're trying to train in zone 2, as I see it anyway. I can actually drop into zone 1 right now and walk, because anything below zone 2, all good, so that I can explain this. But the first big problem with training in zone 3 when you're trying to do a zone 2 session is they are completely different. They elicit completely different benefits to your body. So why muddy the waters? If I've come out here now to do a zone 1-2 session, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to push up to zone 3 because it's a completely different session. So because this session is exclusively about my body's ability to deal with oxygen, like take it in and use it, why would I want to do anything else? That's not what this session is about. If I wanted to do a zone 3 session and get those benefits more about dealing with lactate, I'd do that separately. And that kind of brings me on to the second big problem anyway when it comes to zone 3 training and you're trying to do a zone 2 run is that I think people, from my experience, don't yet understand exactly how to stay in the right zones for the right sessions. I see it all the time.
What do I mean by that? Well, let's take the classic long run for an example. So let's say you're out on your long run. Let's say that it's 21 kilometers and that might be a bit of a push for you. Let's say that you start the run pretty easy, feeling quite good in zone 2 for definite. But then what happens when you get to maybe 3/4 of the run? And be honest with me now, tell me which one of these you do. Now, do you carry on running at the pace you're running at because you want to run that pace, but your heart rate starts going out of zone 2 and into zone 3, so it's starting to deal with lactate? Or do you slow down and account for the fact that you're getting tired and keep your run in zone 2? Which is what you should do, of course, because you're trying to build your aerobic base. But how many of you truly do that every time? I will hold my hands up. I don't do it every time. I try to, but sometimes I want to keep running that pace. But here's the problem. You keep running that pace, your heart rate goes into zone 3, you get more tired, you burn through more energy, your technique starts to wear down. That is where potential overuse injuries can happen, and also, like we go back to the first point, you're not working on your aerobic base. You're starting to work on a completely different physiological system, which maybe would be better being done in a different session. So the solution, on a long run, I'm sorry to say, focus on heart rate, not pace. You just have to chill, have faith in the process. It will come. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that we would move on to zone 3 right now, because that comes after 1 and 2, but actually we're going to jump over it, because zone 3 is the muddiest zone. It's the one we need to unpick the most, and I think we need to focus on it at the end, because it can be your worst enemy, but used well can also be your best friend. So let's jump over. Go to zone 4. Now, zone 4 is just below your anaerobic threshold. Again, in simple terms, you can run at increasing intensities, but not infinitely. There comes a point when your body is accumulating too much lactate that it can get rid of using oxygen. If you've ever felt the burn in your legs when running at high intensity, then you know. And eventually, you'll hit a physical limit and your body has to slow you down. And this limit is called the anaerobic threshold, or lactate turn point 2. But if we train just under this threshold by doing things like lactate threshold intervals, then we can actually push the threshold upwards. Like with the aerobic system, if we do training sessions in that zone where we're building up lactate in the blood, our body decides it's got to do something about it, and it goes about trying to make improvements so that we can tolerate the lactate for longer. We're exposing the body to a weakness, and the body is responding by trying to improve us so it's no longer a weakness. It's genius. But again, zone 3 can muddy the water.
Can't talk. We'll talk when I'm resting. This is fun. Now we're in zone 4, lactate threshold session. So you know what the lactate threshold is and what it does. But here's the big problem with muddying the waters with zone 3 training in this session. I cannot catch my breath. This is not good. So this track session, 8 by 1200 meter repeats with a warm-up and cool down, by the way, is so important to get right. I need to be in zone 4. I need to be pushing my lactate threshold on, because that's going to allow me to run faster at near my lactate threshold when it comes to the tail end of a marathon. And the reason it muddies the water if you go down to zone 3 is quite obvious, very similar to zone 2. You're not training the right thing in this session. I wouldn't be working on this lactate threshold. I've got to go again, rep 5. That's rep 5 done. See, I have to keep my heart rate in some certain kind of place. In this session, it's right at the top of zone 4, which is where my anaerobic threshold, my ability to get rid of that lactate is. So I've got to do it there. It doesn't mean I can't do this session in zone 3, but I'll just get a bunch of different benefits. I feel Mary coming past. Go! Good session, Mary. How you feeling?
Familiar situation, me lying down.
Familiar situation. The session's finished, other than the cool down. I think the point I'm trying to make about this zone 4 session is there's nothing wrong with doing this session as a zone 3 session. But if you're doing it, do it as a zone 3 session, or if you're doing it as a zone 4. Do you see what I'm getting at? Like, pick a zone, work on it, don't muddy the water. Work hard enough in it to be zone 4, or pull back a little bit for it to be zone 3. You'll still get great benefits, they're just different benefits.
And before we go to zone 3, we have to touch on zone 5, the anaerobic zone without oxygen. Short, punchy, disgusting intervals aimed at pushing up your VO2 max. So let's just run you through what zone 5 is. VO2 max is the absolute maximum amount of oxygen your body can breathe in and use during exercise. And again, it's not going to surprise you to know that by training in this zone, you can push the VO2 max upwards and pull the lactate threshold upwards as well from above. But your body really can't function at VO2 max very long at all, so the intervals have to be very short, very intense. Finally, zone 3. Now, traditionally, this zone was called the junk miles zone or wasted miles or the grey zone. It was too fast to get your full aerobic benefit, but it wasn't fast enough to work on your VO2 max or your lactate threshold. And therefore, it was kind of given a bad rap, and it was more the zone that you would train in if you've got your training wrong. But thinking has kind of changed over the last few years, and if we have a look at it, it could well be more beneficial than we've given it credit for. So, zone 3, it's the place just above our aerobic threshold where the body starts to accumulate blood lactate above resting levels. Not enough to have us slow down, but enough that the body has to switch its focus to start using some of that oxygen you're breathing in to remove the lactate. And you know what? This is typically about the effort or heart rate level where we might run some of our marathon at. So why on earth wouldn't we train in this zone as well? Especially here for some of marathon race day. The thinking used to be that you could get good at distance running by just running slow in your base zones and then hard in your higher zones. Leave zone 3 alone because it's pointless. So pretty much every Thursday throughout these training blocks, I've been either on the treadmill or out on the road doing marathon specific work. This one is an example of one I did this week. I was way too scared to talk on the camera. There was too many people in the gym, but I just did chunks of time at my marathon pace because the way I'm thinking is running at my specific marathon pace, what I'll be doing is training my body to deal with the lactate at that pace, but more so, I'm training my mind to deal with the feel of what a marathon feels like at that pace, because a marathon from 32 kilometers onwards often is uncomfortably hard but weirdly still manageable, and these are the types of things I'm trying to replicate in my training. So I actually think zone 3 is giving me physical benefit but also a massive mental benefit, so it absolutely has to be part of my week and it has to be part of my training long term. And if you've got this far in the video, it's probably because you want to know how you actually calculate your zones. And without going into a whole nother video's length, which it is, I'll give you 2 ways. First, lactate threshold testing in a lab, expensive but very precise. The other one is click this video here if you want to find out the way you can do it in the field with a heart rate monitor. Again, not overly precise, but take about 5 beats per minute either side. It's in the ballpark. So I'll link that video, but if you got value today, then consider subscribing to the channel. And I'm also gonna link this video here, which is the big problem with the runner's body. Again, probably not what you'd think. See you next Sunday.